Welcome to Real Fit, a podcast featuring real conversations with real women athletes. I'm your host, Pam Moore. I'm a freelance writer, body positive health coach, certified personal trainer, and a mom of two. And like you, I don't have time for bullshit. I created this show for every busy, badass woman who struggles with the question, am I enough? I'm here to tell you that you are, and my goal is to share stories that will inspire you and let you know you're not alone. Thanks for being here for this episode of Real Fit. Welcome back to Real Fit. It's Pam Moore, and I'm really excited to introduce you to my next guest, Nesha Frazier. She's an HR consultant by day and a leadership coach with Courage Hackers by night. She's also the host of the podcast by the same name, Courage Hackers. She's also a sprinter, a very talented nationally ranked sprinter turned half marathoner, and a mom of three. She is someone who lives a life that is deeply aligned with her purpose. She has done the work of figuring out who she is, what she stands for, where she's going, and how she's going to get there. She's not afraid to do things imperfectly. She's not afraid to make mistakes, and she's not afraid to share about them, which is one of the reasons I love following her on social media. So if you're not already, pause this podcast for a second and go follow Nesha. She's on Instagram, she's on TikTok, she's on LinkedIn, she's everywhere, and she's awesome. You will be glad you followed her. Honestly, I don't know what else I can say about her except that she is just such a breath of fresh air. I don't know, just like listening to her podcast and just talking to her, it like caffeinates my soul. So I'm just pumped to share our conversation with you. I'm going to stop talking and let you listen to Nesha. Enjoy. Nesha Frazier, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's dive in. I want to give everybody a little bit of background about you. Tell us a little bit like who you are, where you live, what you have going on.
Yeah, so I'm Nesha. I am originally from Ohio. I'm currently in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a mom of three. I have three kids under the age of 7. I'm by trade a certified HR professional. I still have a day job, and I am building a brand that's all about personal growth, professional development, and self-leadership. And that's Courage Hackers. That's my company where I work with organizations, I work with individual contributors, women over 30, to really encourage them to take control of their lives and stop settling for good enough. And that's kind of my jam. That's kind of what you hear. I have Courage Hackers podcast. I talk at length about, taking control of your life and allowing things to happen based off of what you want and not being at the mercy of life.
Okay, thank you for that. And I want to just tell everybody, if you haven't listened to Courage Hackers, it is a fantastic podcast. It's like bite-sized inspiration, and it's Nesha's lovely voice just sharing wisdom, and it's beautiful. And so I found you on LinkedIn, and I didn't even realize that you had another facet to your professional life for a while. Like, I just thought you did coaching. So what does, and just all your posts are so inspirational. I want to hear a little bit more about what does self-leadership mean?
Yeah, it's the idea. So it came to be for me because I thought about the fact that from an HR standpoint, from a corporate standpoint, there's so many resources poured into high performers, high achievers, those who want the corporate trajectory, the executive ladder, right? Or if you look at individuals who are like that high performing and they leave the organization and they build these multi-million-dollar businesses and all of these things, these are leaders in their own capacity. But oftentimes leaders in organizations overlook those who are still ambitious. They're still driven, but they don't want the responsibility of an executive role, or maybe they don't want to launch a business, but that doesn't mean you're not a leader within your own right. So self-leadership for me is the idea of you controlling the narrative for your life, you controlling the direction for your life, no matter what that looks like. It's being in control and accountable for your own individual success, and knowing that no matter what happens outside of you, internally, you have the power to shift the momentum in your favor. You don't have to be at the mercy of whatever is going on outside of you. And that's what self-leadership is about for me.
I love that. Would another way of saying that be decide what a win looks like for you and then take responsibility for getting there. And that may
Always.
be at work, but it may be outside of work. Is that correct? Like it could be in any realm of your life?
Any realm of your life. And what I love about it, so to your point about initially starting with coaching, when I was first starting with coaching, I started with career coaching and then it turned into some level of business coaching. And I realized what I really, if I look at my life and everything that I've accomplished as a leader, it's not just a leader in an organization or a leader from a business standpoint. It's the fact that I took accountability for my overall success as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as just as a whole, just being accountable for the outcomes in my life and really being firm on what I stood for and the boundaries that I set and the expectations that I have for life. And I think that comes again from just being accountable, looking at life in an objective way, not criticizing yourself, being forgiving of your failures, being open to the fact that things don't always look exactly how they will look for you, and that's okay. There's a lot of shifting that goes with that and pivoting, but it's the idea of teaching you to be a leader of your life and looking objectively at your life and giving yourself the grace to explore what possibilities the universe have for you.
Oh, you just said so many things there that I want to unpack, but there's a couple things too. I want to go back and talk about like, how did you get to where you are and what role did sports and fitness play in that? But just
Yeah.
really quick before I forget, did you ever think about being like a pastor or a clergy person of any kind? I just love listening to you.
No, it's funny because like I have a really weird relationship with the church, a really weird traditional Christian relationship. So I don't even identify as a Christian. I know that sounds weird, but I don't. I just am a believer. So
Okay.
I think that there are so many ways to find God, and for me, it's going to your question that we're about to go into is fitness. For me, running is like that's my sanctuary. Being on open pavement, that's in my DNA. That's my sanctuary, and there is no better place for me to find God than there. And I find that the more in line with my spirituality I've grown and who I am, the better I'm able to pour into others and make other people who maybe have opted out of the belief in God see that God, you can achieve a relationship with God in so many ways. Mine isn't in church. I don't relate to church. Mine is on the open ground by myself, no music, just me and the nature, and that's where I find God. So, yeah, in so many ways, I guess it is some type of spiritual message, just not in a traditional sense, I guess,
You know,
right?
I relate to that. When you were like, "Oh, I feel like it sounds weird that I'm not a Christian." That's not weird to me at all because like I'm Jewish, so I'm like I'm down. But like with my my kids go to religious school, and like one of the cantor there has this song. I forget how it goes, but one of the lines is that like a little bit of God is in all of us. And
Yeah.
my 6-year old we were talking about like what is God, and at one point we like that song God is a woman, but she said,
Hmm.
well, for one thing, she was like God is a woman, and then she was like, and for another thing, like it's in all of us, right? Like we're all,
Yeah.
and I was like, that's true, and I feel like running for me is a time when I can shut off all the noise
Hmm.
and be with
Hmm.
myself, and
Hmm.
that I feel like is a little bit of that spirituality God piece coming in.
Yeah, I do. I do. If you think of it, like I don't even attempt to quote Bibles, but if you think of the idea that God created us in His image, and if the I had a lifelong struggle with who I was and how I looked, and I realized like if you learn to hate yourself, like what is that saying about how you feel about God? Like how can I have a relationship with God if I don't even like welcome who I was? I didn't like my behaviors. I didn't like how I looked. I didn't like my attitude. I didn't like a lot of things about myself, which kind of coincided with a really bad relationship I had with God, that was stemmed from an event. There was an event that happened in my life, but nonetheless, I really didn't like who I was. So I wasn't surprised that I struggled with God. And the more I've come to love myself, like flaws and all the things about me, I find that I've just welcomed the idea that, um, I just welcome the idea of God and love a little bit easier.
I love that. All right, so
Anyway,
yeah, talk to me about that fitness and how your
yeah.
relationship with fitness and running has evolved. And I definitely want to hear more about the idea of really full blown self love, self acceptance, because that's
Hmm.
hard. That's hard work.
It is. It is. And so running for me, I started running track. I was a sprinter when I turned 5 years old. Like they realized that really early that I was really fast. So at 5 years old, they started putting me up against like the 10 and 11-year olds. And so eventually I ran from the age of 5 until I went to college at 19. And I was a nationally ranked athlete, one of the top 10 in the state, top 10 in the nation a few times over, Junior Olympics. I was invited to Nike training camps and all of these things. And I have to tell you this, that uh, the greatest example of the power of an insecurity with yourself, the greatest regret I have in my life, really the only regret I have in my life. When I was in college, I started off and I was so excited about going to college and running at this level, Division II. I ran at the University of Findlay, which if you're familiar with football, Ben Roethlisberger, the quarterback for the Steelers, he's from that city. So that's like their thing.
Okay.
But anyway, I remember the day we got our uniforms, and I remember my roommate coming in with our uniforms. And, in track, you wear Spankies, right? I'd never worn Spankies before.
Like underwear, right? For people who may not be familiar. It's basically it's not even a granny panty, like a little smaller than a granny panty. Yeah.
Yep, a little bit smaller than a granny panty. So a cute little tankini and, the little granny panty running. I'd never run in anything like that before. So I, thanks to puberty, developed stretch marks on my hips and my butt and my thighs and all those things. So I was really insecure about stretch marks from 12 and 13 years old. And I didn't wear swimming suits. I didn't wear shorts because I hated the way I looked because of the stretch marks, right? And that would have been the first time wearing the Spankies that I had to show the world that my legs are riddled with stretch marks. And this insecurity, Pam, that I had led me to quit. I dropped out of college and I quit my track team. And I told everyone else around me that I did this because I was just burnt out. I've been running track for almost my entire life, 14 years, and I was burnt out and I was depressed, but it had nothing to do with that. It was 100% the physical insecurity that I had of my body being covered in stretch marks at 19 years old, where none of my friends had stretch marks like that. Isn't that crazy?
That breaks my heart.
Yeah, it does. When I look back and I'm like, my heart hurts for that, girl. It's the only regret I have in my life, that I gave an insecurity that much power, that much power to give up something that I was great at. And it breaks my heart. And so from there, I dropped out, didn't know what I was going to do. I was going to a community college and I was driving back and forth about 30 miles. My car broke down, so I couldn't go to college. And so I took a job at McDonald's. And I remember my first day at orientation, 19 years old, I was being trained by a 14-year-old. And I was sitting here like, yeah, no, this is not going to happen, right? So I quit my job and immediately joined the Air Force and just dropped out, joined the Air Force. Didn't tell anyone in my family except my grandmother until like a week before I left. I don't know why I did that. 19, that's what we do. And from there, my love from short sprints. So I had an opportunity to compete to some extent in running in the military, but that turned from short sprinting to longer distance running. And I just fell in love with longer distance running. And so I didn't get to compete like I did as a sprinter, but it opened up a level of running that I was never, like Black kids in my neighborhood never did long distance running. It just wasn't a thing, And so when I got an opportunity in the military to run half marathons and do all these 10Ks and stuff, I just fell in love. And so it's been an opportunity for me to do that. And then you move forward years and years. And here I am as a mother trying to figure out how to carve out an hour of my day to find space for running and all of that. And so that's kind of my fitness journey. But yeah, it's very spiritual in so many ways, because the greatest regret I have in my life is attached to fitness, but it's also the thing that gives me the most calm, the most peace is fitness.
Yeah. Wow. That's remarkable. Now, what made you choose the Air Force as opposed to any other branch of the military? I have so many questions about what you just said, but that's like the first one.
Yeah, so this was 2008, what year was it? 2004. It was 2004. So 9/11 wasn't too far removed. I had a
Yep.
lot of friends who were in the military, and then I knew a lot was going on in the news. And what I didn't see a lot was Air Force dying, right? And then I had a friend who went right after high school, and I called her like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about the Air Force? And I knew individuals in the Air Force were deploying. I didn't know enough to know, like, what is the extent of the deaths going on, you know? And so it really was that simple. It was that I was just watching the news and hearing Army and, you know, Navy and Marines dying left and right. And every now and then you hear an Air Force member dying. And I had a friend who just gave me a little insight from her 1 year of experience. And that was enough for me to say, okay, I'm going to the Air Force.
How long were you in the Air Force?
So 8 years total. So 4 years active duty and then 4 years in the Guard.
Okay. Yeah. Best and worst.
Um, Gosh, I have a really, I don't know, I've been a pretty lucky girl over the course of my military career, because the best part of my military career was I found out I was going to Korea. And so when we were in tech school, we all get orders, paper orders. And I remember looking at my orders and it said SCORE, SKORE. And I'm like, SCORE, like what state is SCORE? Like, where is that on the map? So my girlfriend and I, this is old school. So like we had to print, fold out maps and everything. We're like, where's SCORE on the map looking for it? And it's South Korea. So I'm like boohoo crying, like, oh my God, I'm going to South Korea. First time in the military. And I get there and my immediate supervisor is a woman. My chief of my squad, my shop is a woman. My squadron commander is a woman. My group commander is a woman. Like I had at 19 years old, one of the most amazing opportunities to see women in power. And I didn't see that in my life, like ever. And not only one or two, like my entire leadership, for the most part, it was women. So you talk about like having an opportunity. I was under, I was able to get mentored through this program with, and not only one of the women was just women, she was the only Black colonel woman, female colonel, like in the entire Air Force. And so that was just like crazy. And I had an opportunity to mentor under her. So I shadowed her for an entire day, walk her in her shoes, going to meetings. And like I'm 19, 20 years old. Like who gets opportunities to do this? So I can tell you about all the fun things that I've done in the military, but hands down, the best part was I started my career with powerful women. Powerful women that held me to a standard, who pushed things in front of me, who didn't let me get in my head. You know what I mean? Like they made me uncomfortable with taking opportunities that I wasn't ready for. I wasn't ready. I was young. I was like anxious all the time. And that was the best part of it. I would have to say the worst part was just I'm one of those birds that really struggle to be caged, I guess. And so I think that's what it was, is that I was coming into myself. And the military is all about conformity. You know, it's all about looking the same, talking the same, walking the same. And the more I grew into who I was, the more I realized it just wasn't, I didn't have the freedom to be who I needed to be, right? And I was getting pulled. And so that's ultimately it wasn't the worst part. It was a blessing, but that's what led me to ultimately leave. But I had an amazing opportunity to be mentored and groomed by powerful women. And there are very few women I've come across the course of my military career who could say that.
That's remarkable.
It is like, I'm so grateful. And I still talk to them. I mean, however many years later, I still talk to them.
That's beautiful. So, what, looking back at like 19-year-old Nesha, self-conscious of the stretch marks, is there anything looking back that you feel like, dang it, like if only XYZ, if I had like, I don't know, had a mentor or a big sister or like if I had known that I mean, you can't be the only, I mean, now I'm sure you know, like every woman's self-conscious.
Everyone has it,
right? What could have made it different for you, do you think, if anything?
So I think when I think about, it's a good question. I think I was the oldest in my family, the oldest girl, and I didn't necessarily have a lot of women to lean on, in my life. And so I was really shy when I was young, really, really shy. And I didn't open up about a lot. I really still internalize, but I really internalized everything back then. I think if I just had anyone who noticed me enough to know when my shyness was also me processing and internalizing and making things about myself that weren't like making things about myself that weren't necessarily things that needed to be about me. And I wish I had someone who noticed that, like anyone who knew enough about me to realize that I just needed an example that things existed outside of me.
Do you still consider yourself shy?
No, I don't. I say I'm more of an introvert, like a textbook introvert, where
Yeah.
I love people. I'm genuinely curious, but I get drained from like talking all the time, and like I absorb others' energies. I'm so sensitive to other people's energies, and so I have to have time to decompress and be by myself. But no, I don't stay shy anymore. I've learned there's power in being quiet, and I don't need to talk quite as much. And I've learned over time that there's just as much power in being a great listener as there is in being a great speaker.
How did you find the confidence to be like, you know what, if I have something to say, I'm going to say it?
Yeah, I think it was the best part was of my journey. So when I got out of the military, I just, let me think what I was doing. Yeah, I was just getting out of the military. I just graduated college. I was like 25, 26 years old. And I was working on a job as a sales coordinator for a hotel. I thought I wanted to get into sales, and I still love sales. And I was making just $10 an hour. And I remember having this this conversation with my manager. I never spoke up. I never inserted myself or asserted myself into conversations that weren't about me. And I remember telling her my desires to take this next position that just became available as a sales manager. And her feedback to me was like, not only do I not see you in that position, but I don't know how to develop you in that position. And it made me realize like, oh, I was livid. I was livid. I was heartbroken. I was all the things. I'm like, I've had 8 years of military career. I have a degree. I'm doing all of these things. I'm just making $10 an hour. But is that her fault? Is that her fault? Right? Like that's my fault. And so it made me start this journey of just throwing myself out there. So that same year, I started my first WordPress blog. And I used to have this personal development blog. It was more so like a personal journey, but it did really, really well views wise. And it was just me putting myself out there, similar to Courage Hackers, where I just started talking and talking and talking about things that were things that I was really quiet about. And I realized if I don't start telling people who I am and what I stand for, I'm going to continue to have these types of experiences where someone tells me, well, this is all I see you doing anyway. So why are you asking me for something else? That was an example of my career and my salary. But gosh, that happens in relationships, not in my situation, but that happens in relationships. That happens all the time. If you don't stand for who you are, stand up for who you are, people are going to tell you who they think you are. Right. And I just realized that it wasn't necessarily any crazy shift or conversation, except that experience made me realize that I can't be mad at her. I kind of put myself in that situation.
Wow, that takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah, it does, but it was really because, like I said, I started my self-development journey around that time. I started reading. Are you familiar with Christine Hassler? Have you ever heard of her, Christine Hassler?
I think I heard of her on your podcast.
I talk about her a lot because I started reading this book of hers called 20 something, 20 everything. And I think that was her very first book. And I think that was her first book. But when I started reading her book, it was all about a quarter life crisis. Like I knew what a midlife crisis was. But I'm like, what is a quarter life crisis? And I'm like, okay, I was 25, 26. My identity was enriched in the military for the longest. So who I was the military. I had separated myself from who I was back home in Ohio. I didn't have track anymore. I'm like, so who am I? Right? Like, what do I want? I had no clue. And so I read her book and understood the idea of all of these pressures and influence to have everything figured out by a certain age. I didn't necessarily have that timeline in my head, but I understood everything else about being in your mid-20s and trying to have it all figured out at a certain age. And it was her book that kind of helped me to give myself permission to just go through this journey of just exploring who I was and what I wanted and try to figure out what I didn't want. Even if I didn't know what I wanted, to figure out at least what I did not want. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. So what was your next career step after that manager was like, well, I don't see you in that role. How did you move on from there?
So it's so funny. I talk about money mindset a lot. My money mindset was so It was so bad. So the next step that I took was an opportunity as a third-party logistics sales rep, making $35,000 an hour. That was the immediate next role. And I remember getting the offer letter, and I was like, "Oh my God, these people are paying me $35,000. How are they going to like? Do they even know I'm not worth this? And what if they figured out?" I just remember being so excited because it was like, I know I made more in the military. The military doesn't do a great job, at least back then, of giving you a full picture of your earnings because you're paid broken down by your pay period, not your total salary.
Okay.
So even when you have these additional earnings, you don't see the total salary that you earned at the end of the year. So you don't really have a stable, back then, you didn't necessarily have a stable sense of your worth. And so I didn't really know my financial worth at that point. You know, I had no clue. And I took this job, and by far, like day one, if you know anything about like logistics and truck drivers and all of this stuff, I mean, it was just
Not much.
cutthroat, like everyone cursing everyone out. The first day I walked in at 7 o'clock in the morning, everyone's getting cursed out. Truck drivers, our general manager.
That I'm familiar with. My dad owns a scrap metal plant. And so I was in that truck. Yeah. I used to like weigh the trucks in the office, and there's no manners.
Gosh.
There's no, it's not.
No. Oh, culture shock.
Yeah.
But I knew I had a manager, a male manager. He was my age. And he was really setting me up for things to make me successful, which I had the wits to realize that even if this role wasn't long term, there were skills within that role that I could use, such as like account management. I managed the largest account in our company, and they were by far the most demanding. And I mean, you had to just be on it, sharp responses. Email management. We would get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day. You had to know how to manage your email really well. A lot of people don't know how to effectively manage your inbox, you know, and I learned that through there. So all of these little skills that helped me to have better customer orientation, but also to be sharper as a professional. And he kind of groomed me for that. And it sucked. Like it triggered panic attacks. Like I used to have panic attacks every single Sunday.
Like full on, like feeling like you're going to die, panic attack?
Like in the tub, freaking out, crying like a baby, because it was just a horrible environment. But I knew if I could just stick it out for a year, the skills on my resume would be enough to get me in the next door. And then I got pregnant with my son, and knew it wasn't like, we were working crazy hours, like 14-hour days. And I knew it was just a matter of time. And so I did that and quit that job and had my son, and I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything lined up. Started digging deeper into reading more and exploring myself more. And a couple of months later, I ended up with 3 job opportunities, all HR related, which is what I wanted to do. And I ended up with the second largest staffing agency in the world at that point. And it was 100% because of the skill set that I had. And then the referral from my previous manager, he wrote me a beautiful referral for that role. So it worked out. Everything worked out.
That's awesome.
I am.
I was gonna say, if you want a nurse, like I don't care. Like,
okay,
do what you gotta do.
I'm probably gonna angle myself a little
whatever
bit,
you need to do. I once nursed a baby during a performance review. So.
Did you really?
Yeah, like I wasn't really working. I was still on maternity leave, but it was time for my performance review, and they were like, "Well, can you come in?" And I feel like my baby was like 3 or 4 months old. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't want to get a sitter just to come in for like 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. I was like, can I bring the baby? And my manager said, sure. So, and you know, they get fussy, and it's just like an easy way to make them stop. And so I was like, don't mind me. She didn't have kids, and I think she was mortified, but I was like, I got to do what I got to do. We can have a crying baby, or you can like maybe see my nipple. We're all going to survive. I like it.
You have 2, right?
I have 2, yeah. And they're they're not, one is 6 and one is 8. And I just told a girlfriend of mine who has a baby, I was like, I kind of wish they were still nursing, because it just makes your life so easy. You could just be like, oh, you're mad, you're sad, you're hungry, here. Like,
yep, put a boob in the mouth. Yep.
It's much more complicated now. How old is your oldest kid?
So 7, and then I have the middle one turning 5 on Monday, and then this little one here.
Okay. Wow. So you have your hands full. Okay. So that's actually a great segue, because I wanted to ask you, how do you, especially as an introvert with 3 kids, and I'm sure what is not a quiet household, as an introvert, as a runner, like how do you fill up your cup? How do you recharge? When do you find the time?
I love that question. I love it because, a lot of people, when they talk about everything that I have on my plate, they just assume, right? Like, oh my gosh, if you do it all, that you live in a constant state of panic. And to be quite honest, like, I'm a, I'm not a chill personality, but I'm not one of those people who kind of, this one here. I'm not one of those people who believe I have to do it all. You know, I just don't. And I think it's an undue pressure that we as women put on ourselves that you have to do it all. I'm fortunate that I have a husband who cooks and he cleans and he offsets so much that in a traditional gender role relationship you wouldn't have in place. So I'm very lucky there. But I think being so busy, going back to having the corporate structure of my job and then having three kids and this window of time before they have to go to bed, it makes my decision making very lean, meaning like it's very easy for me to figure out how to navigate my day from a decision making. Like I'm not exhausted mentally when I come home or when I go to bed because I really don't waste a lot of energy and time on things that are not going to progress a goal for my family or for myself or give value short term or long term. Like it's so easy for me to say yes or no because I only look at the things that I only do the things that are actually going to make a difference. Like my house right now is a total mess because I haven't felt well this week.
Yeah.
And I am not getting myself worked up thinking like, oh my gosh, the world is going to collapse because my house is a mess. No, I'll do it on Sunday. Like it's that simple.
Yeah.
I had a million other things to do. It wasn't a priority for me. So it sounds like it's crazier than it is, to be quite honest with you. The thing that is hard is, of course, having a baby, right? And a breastfeeding baby. And she's so mom dependent right now. But other than that, I just have to find these windows. So I don't necessarily get an hour to myself anymore. Mm-hmm. However, I can find increments of 10 minutes, right? 10 minutes to read a book or 10 minutes to just sit by myself. I'll sit in my car like in the middle of the day at work, or if my kids are eating dinner and I'm finished, I'll just go sit in my car for 10 minutes and just like
that's amazing.
And just decompress because again, I don't if I wait on the perfect time to have all the time I need, I won't have it. It won't happen,
I do know. Yeah, it's like making the perfect the enemy of the good, right?
It is. It is. And I think it makes you, I don't know, it's a recipe for disaster, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you at some point, I feel like you said on social media, you were training for a half marathon. Are you still?
I'm trying to, I really am. I'm lucky that my body responds really well. I don't need like most of them. I've done about a dozen half marathons, which is nothing compared to what I know you do.
I don't know about that, but I don't know if I've done a dozen half marathons, but
but I don't have to train extensively. My body, like I said, being a runner forever, for the most part, I just have to kind of get some muscle memory going, and I don't have to do a lot of work.
That's good.
So I'm not fast. My goal isn't to be the fastest. My goal is to just get it done.
Yep.
So that's it.
Okay. And if you do get in a run, like, are you most likely to do it first thing in the morning or like lunch break at work?
Mm-hmm. First thing in the morning. I'm an early riser, and if I get a chance to get up and just go, I do. Every chance I get. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So question for you, as far as prioritizing and going, okay, is this advancing me or is it not? Two questions. This is a 2-part question. One, I guess, how do you keep your long-term priorities at the forefront of your mind? Because like for me, for example, like I look at a messy room and it's right in my face. It's so hard for me to think, yeah, but what about the long-term stuff? Because that stuff is like nebulous. It's more of a vision. How do you keep your vision so clear?
I think it's just because I'm very mindful of my energy and the time constraints. It's so hard for me I think in terms of like productivity blocks. You know what I mean? Like I think in terms of blocks, and hold on. And so everything I look at, I'm like, okay, if I clean up my room right now, this isn't too bad. I gotta go do dishes, but this would probably take 10 minutes. Okay. If I have 30 minutes, okay, I got 10 minutes, I can do this. It's 20 minutes. 20 minutes. What can I do in 20 minutes? Can I get those dishes done in 20 minutes? Probably not. But I can go and write some content for 20 minutes. Or I can so it's this constant negotiation of time that I live in. So I wish it was like a fancier way for me to tell you that that's how I do it. But It really is that simple. I just think in terms of time allocation all the time is
Okay.
I have this little block of time. What can I do with it? And frankly, I don't get too hung up on the longer term things. I try as much as I can to have goals and have a vision, but I'm so flexible. I have no choice but to be
Mm-hmm.
flexible,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a big part of it is just being flexible. I'm very flexible because I just can't hold on to, I can't control a lot of things with three kids and a career,
Yeah. Yeah. That's realistic. That's realistic. I want to switch gears a little bit. I know you've shared pretty openly on social media about having experienced pregnancy loss. Um,
Yeah.
can you share a little bit about that and maybe speak to how your journey to practicing self-leadership played a role in how you coped?
Yeah, I 100%. I share it openly. When I went through recurrent pregnancy loss, I didn't even, how you have this like confidence once you do something well and then you do it again well and you have no issues with it. It doesn't even come to mind that there is an alternative way, an alternative outcome until you experience it. And when I had my first two kids, I didn't have any issues whatsoever. And then I just had this intuition I was going to get pregnant again. I knew specifically it was going to be a girl, and I just didn't know it would be as hard as it was. So in 2018, we started, down that journey. And then about, gosh, I want to say I was 14 weeks when I found out I miscarried the first one. And I mean, I was just like shattered, just completely shattered that was a possibility for me. I'm like, I'm in shape. I'm in great. I've always maintained a really healthy pregnancy weight. I worked out, I ran. I don't have health issues. At least I didn't think so then. And it just didn't make sense. It did not make sense. And I was so angry because I was angry at my body doing something that it was supposed to do, which was that I'd actually lost the baby at about 10 weeks, but my body didn't recognize that I had a loss. And so I was at that almost, I think that was the beginning of my second trimester. So I had yeah, when I lost that one, I think that it just broke my heart because it was the idea that I didn't think that it was an option for me. And so it was realizing that my body had lost a baby for 4 weeks and I just had this baby in me, right? For 4 weeks and I didn't know it. And I was just angry. I was so angry that my body didn't give me a sign at all. I kind of had this feeling that something went left, but I didn't know. And so I was lucky enough to have the procedure, a DNC, the very next day. A lot of women don't get that option, right? To have it immediately. So I had to wait a full day, which sucks, but I do know enough at this point to know some women have to wait days or weeks to even go through that, which I can imagine it. But I was just really, really, I was just angry. That's all it was. I was angry for like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks or so. I took a week off of work. My sweet husband realized that like I was in this hole and he couldn't dig me out of it. And he asked my absolute best friend in the whole world. We went to Korea together and we went to boot camp and tech school together. And she lives in Florida. And he texted her and was like, "Hey, Tiffany, Nisha's really depressed, and I think it'll make her happy if you just come up here." And like she literally dropped everything and brought her family to spend the weekend with me. And like I didn't know she was coming. And I saw her and like just broke down crying because she's like the safe space that I never had. You know what I mean? Like
I
it
want to
gets me
cry.
emotional
Yeah.
thinking about it. It does because it's like I said, I'm a pretty just life as a whole as a child kind of made it hard for me to let people in, and she's one of the few people I actually let in. And so her, and then I have my other friends, like I said, I don't let anyone in, like ever. Yeah, like ever. My other friends like sending flowers and they're buying dinner for us and like text message endlessly and checking in with my husband. And while I ignored everyone's phone call and I told everyone I don't want to talk and I did everything I could to push them away, and yet they showed up for me, my friends. Like I have a weird relationship with my family, but like my friends just supported me in a way that pulled me through that. And again, it goes back to me for a reminder of God's grace, like when I'm in a point where I can't even be nice and kind to myself. And then God just surrounded me, despite me trying everything I could to push them away, because that's what I do. It just surrounded me with people to remind me, like, you are not alone. And, and I'm fortunate that I was old enough, I think, or I don't think it's age, wise enough to not put the blame on myself. I was angry at my body. And then over time, I realized, like, no, your body was doing what it was supposed to do, which is try to keep the baby in there, right? It hormonally and all of this stuff. But I didn't blame myself. Like, what did I do wrong and all of this? I didn't go down that rabbit hole. But I'll tell you, the hardest part of the loss wasn't just the loss. The hardest part was going back to work. And that's a part of like pregnancy loss. I don't think I had 2 additional miscarriages after that, but like the returning to work with a pregnancy loss is the part that I feel like no one was talking about, because it was just interesting, because I hormonally was still pregnant, meaning for 2 more months almost, I was still showing symptoms. I was still nauseous. I was still like exhausted. I was still, I was still going through all of this, the physical side of it all. Like, I still had all of these physical symptoms of being pregnant, and yet I had no baby because I had a forced procedure. So my body hadn't registered yet that it wasn't pregnant anymore. It took about 2 more weeks to register that it wasn't pregnant. And then it took about another 6 weeks for the hormones to completely leave my body, And so it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable, because I had a manager who, it was just an very unkind period. I spent most of my mornings like crying in the car for like the first 10 minutes, like just every single morning crying for 10 minutes, get in my car and just trying to put a face on to, like we said at the very beginning of this conversation, being in HR and having to support everyone else through everything they're going through, and no one to support me. Right. And so I think the hardest part of it was that going back to work. And I promised God that I would do everything in my power once I got out of that, to just make sure women know that you're not alone. Like, I felt like, especially being a woman of color, I never really heard any other Black women talk about pregnancy loss like that. Like, from a celebrity standpoint, I remember Gabrielle Union talking about it. But I'm like, Beyonce, of course. But I'm like real life. No one in my real life has ever talked about pregnancy loss. And then from my experience, I learned that my mother had a loss, and then my aunt had a loss, and all of these things. But nonetheless, before that, it wasn't a reality. It wasn't normal to talk about pregnancy loss. And I said, well, I'm going to change that. Then I'm going to make sure, as many women as possible know that you can still be strong. And I'm a very strong woman, but it's not a failure on your part. And I later learned that I had an autoimmune condition. So I always say, like, my losses, they saved my life. They saved my life. Had I not had these losses, I don't know where I would be from a health standpoint.
Wow. So you wouldn't have known about your autoimmune condition had you not been exploring, like, why does this happen with the pregnancy losses?
Yeah. Fortunately, we went down the testing rabbit hole and found out about some things. But like I said, besides like just being really sad, I had this period before the losses, that I was just depressed. And I'm like, I have anxiety to some extent, but I'm not a depressed person. And I was just a dark period, and I couldn't explain it. Hormonally, I had no like sex drive. I had no interest. I had no interest in anything. Like, it was kind of your standard classic depression. And I couldn't understand why. I'm like, my life is going well. Why am I like mad all the time? Right. And so that was really the only symptom or clue I had that something was going wrong with my body. Everything else was fine. It was like, I say, functionally falling apart. That's what I keep calling it. It's like no one necessarily identified it as something being wrong, because I was still functioning, but I was falling apart. I really was falling apart. I was just functioning.
Yeah. Since you've been openly sharing about that experience, especially as you mentioned, like, this isn't something Black women typically talk about. Like, where was the support when have you experienced a response from other women saying thank you?
I do. I posted not too long ago a video, this little tribute to my baby, that it was a struggle for me to do, but I wanted to tell just a version of her story. And that video just had like dozens of messages from women and not just women, men too, men reaching out and telling me like their wives went through this. And it was such a sensitive time that, like, I thought this was the most beautiful part. It was such a sensitive time for them to talk about how they felt. in those experiences because it wasn't their bodies. So they didn't feel like they had a right to it. And they're reaching out, like allowing me to let them pour into me about, or, about what, or excuse me, allowing me to pour into them about what they went through as the partner of, their wife. I'm like, gosh, I didn't expect that whatsoever. And I knew that was the case because I saw my husband struggle with it. I feel like they didn't think they have like you said, a right to their pain at all.
That's really interesting. That never occurred to me. Speaking of people that you don't hear from
Mm-mm.
men.
Mm-mm.
But of course men are going to have their feelings about it.
They do. And I thought that was the best piece of it. It's like these men just telling. I had one who, he said he has 6 kids. So he started with a comment, and then we got into a private message. But he has 6 kids, and his wife lost, I think, 4 pregnancies outside of their 6 kids. And he was just like telling me all about that and what that did to her and how it made him feel as a partner and not being able to support her. And you just feel like a total failure. I'm like, gosh, this was years ago for him, and he's still experiencing this. And it's just a conversation we don't have a lot, talking about how it impacts our partners too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw, was that a TikTok video you made about your rainbow baby? I saw that. That was beautiful. Can I link to a TikTok video online?
Of course.
I'm going to link to that because that was a beautiful video. And that was really, obviously, I think everything you do is from your heart, but I could tell that was from your heart. Thank you for sharing all of that. I appreciate that. And I'm hoping that somebody listening is going to hear it and go, wow, that's like my goal here, is just to let everybody know, like, hey, you're not alone. Like, a lot of us are dealing with the same stuff. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
You mentioned was it Christine Kellerman? The 20 everything?
Oh, Hassler.
What did I say? What? Okay, you know who I'm talking about.
I do. I think you were thinking of "Don't Quit Your Day Job," Christine, or is she Kathy?
No, I know who you're. Kathy Heller.
Kathy Heller. At least that's what I heard.
I like her podcast. It doesn't matter. The point is, what are some of your other favorite personal development books?
So I love Brendan Burchard. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm gonna write that down. I'll link to that in the show notes.
Oh gosh, I love everything he does. Everything. I'm reading his book right now, the Motivation Manifesto, and he just speaks my love language in so many ways. And he's a guy, and I rarely listen to like man advice. I know that sounds really bad to say.
I don't either.
But I don't. Like, I just don't. No, I don't. But I love him. He does YouTube videos all the time, and so I've had to shift away from books, and so I listen to a lot of podcasts, watch the YouTube videos. If you get a chance to just binge his YouTube, like, it's so good, and I love his spirit. Like, it's so pure. Okay. It's so pure, and just like his version of spirituality is very similar to mine. Like, he'll still curse, and he doesn't necessarily quote Bibles and all of this stuff, but he talks a lot about God. And he had this horrible event that I absolutely love him. I'll tell you, to be quite honest with you, the last maybe year, I've moved away from trying to absorb as much personal development as I used to, because I'm trying to trust my voice more, and I don't want to be influenced, if that makes sense. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to find my voice and where I stand in this space, and I want to feel like my ideas are built upon the foundation that I built years ago, but now they're just mine, and so I don't listen quite as much. His book I'm reading right now, but and parenting books I'm into right now. That's another form of development I'm into. But let me think of some older ones The Secret was always my favorite. The Secret is like law of attraction and all that stuff that started me down that rabbit hole.
Yep.
What other book have I read recently? I can't think of any others off the top of my head who I just like am into besides Brendan. I'm just a lifelong fan of his.
Does he have a podcast?
He does. Okay. So
that's an easy way to consume. Like, you don't have to be touching your phone. You can just be, because I go for walks a lot. I'll check him out.
Yep, I love him. Love him.
Podcast. And yeah, back to like you saying you want to be knowing like where you stand without getting mixed up with everybody else's message. I feel like one of the things you do really well is you're really clear on like who you are for, like who's gonna be helped by you. Will you tell our listeners like who you can help?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that you say. It's so funny, like the version of what you do or who you are to yourself versus how others see you. Because in my head, I'm still like, Nisha, what are you talking about sometimes, right? Like, like who are you talking to sometimes? Like, is this even going to make sense? And who is this for? But you know what? A lot of times I tell the journey I spent the first 10 years of self development was me coaching myself because I never really had a reference for a lot of things in my life. And I often speak to my younger self. I'm often coaching my younger self, or I'm thinking about my friends in this current version of their lives and thinking like, what is it that I don't want to I don't want to disrupt their energy or what they are going through right now by sharing with them. But if I were someone else, what would I tell them? You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how would I coach them? And
Mm-hmm.
they know I'm talking about them or to them. Like, they'll hit me like, Nisha, I know that was about me. Like, I know you know, but like, I know, but I don't want to ruin it. But a lot of times it really is that. It's the idea of, so I think a lot about, like I said, being a strong one, being someone who absorbed so much emotional responsibility for everyone else my entire life. And I never necessarily, I used to pray for a friend like me. It's something I used to say, like, God, I wish I had a friend like me, someone who listened or poured into me or just walked through the weeds with me, or someone who just like, it wasn't even about like emotionally holding my hand. It was about the fact that they just reminded me that you are in control. Like, you have the power. Like, I'm going to listen to you, but I want you to get up. Like, you have to get up. Like, that's what I needed someone to tell me, instead
Mm-hmm.
of sitting around and waiting on someone to solve my problems, instead of sitting around and waiting on someone to give me an opportunity. You know what I mean? Like, when I coached myself through the period of like the woe is me period and wondering why things weren't just happening for me and easier, I just like, Nisha, of course they're not happening because you're not doing anything. You're not being responsible for your own success. And so when I really took that, my own advice and started shifting, that's when I realized. So I think about that. I think about the women who I always talk about over 30, because by then you probably have children, you're maybe married, you have a career that you've gotten settled into, but you don't really, it doesn't light you up. Right. And so instead of hoping that you find the time to work out again and you have 3 kids, make the time to work out again. If instead of hoping that you find a career in a outside of your toxic work environment, I'm in a toxic work environment myself. Instead of doing that and it's draining you, create something that's going to give you joy. Start your podcast, right? Write your
Yep.
book. Do
Yep.
the things that bring you joy and stop waiting on someone else to do that for you. And so that's who I talk to a lot. Just women who are really just, they've gotten on this hamster wheel, they've gotten comfortable, but they know it's not enough. They absolutely know that they're capable of more, and they just are surrounded by people who maybe just keep feeding into this idea that if you wait long enough, things will happen for you. That's not how it works. You can wait all you want, and like I said, I'm a believer, and I believe in God, and I believe time and everything, but I also believe God tells you to do the work. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yes.
also believe you have to put your feet on the ground and go, hell or high water. You got to go, and trust that if this is for you, that's where your faith steps in. If it's for you, it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen without you doing the work
Yeah,
at
yeah,
all.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's funny that you're like, I don't know what people I think you're very clear about like who you are. Everything I see from you, like your podcast and all your LinkedIn posts, it's all pointing to the same direction of like, this is Nisha, like the self-confident coach who doesn't waste time second
Mm.
guessing. So I want to dive into the quick set. Are you ready? All right, what is your favorite meal?
Oh, pancakes, and specifically McDonald's pancakes. I
Oh,
hate that I love McDonald's pancakes so much. I do.
now
They're
I
so
want to
good.
try it. My
Oh,
dad
they're
is like
so good.
obsessed with coupons and he's like randomly sending us all these coupons to places we wouldn't normally
Mhm.
eat, like KFC and like Burger. I'm gonna ask him for McDonald's coupons.
I love them.
um, what's your favorite book? Like, we kind of touched on that, but
We did. It's I would have to say it's The Secret. It still is The Secret is my favorite. Or I'll backtrack in an old school one, Who Moved My Cheese. I feel like everyone read that, right? Do you
hmm
remember that?
yeah,
Who Moved My Cheese?
yeah.
That's still one of my favorite books. It's such a simple message. Like I read it to my kids, like it's such a simple message about change and finding your own opportunities.
I love it. What about what's your favorite movie?
Um, The Story of Us. That's the name of it. I was thinking like Michelle Pfeiffer, Bruce Willis. The Story of Us. Do you remember this movie?
Is it a rom-com?
It is a rom-com. Don't judge me.
I'm not. No, sometimes you just want something light. Okay, I'm going to keep that in mind for when I just want to zone out.
It's very light, very light.
Okay, what's your favorite vacation spot?
So let me think. The last time we went on vacation, we went to Texas for Thanksgiving. I'm gonna have to say Texas. I've never been in with an opportunity to actually explore Texas, and we went to Dallas, and I just fell in love with Dallas.
Dallas. I haven't been there.
Oh gosh, it was so good. I want to move there now. So yeah, I love it.
Wow. You know where else I want to go is Charleston. I've never been to Charleston.
Well, come on.
The whole time I lived in North Carolina, I wanted to do have you done the Cooper Bridge run?
Yes, I have.
It's legendary. And every year I lived there, I was like, oh, I'll do it next year. And then I moved away and I never ended up doing it. So when we can travel again, that's on my list.
Oh, I like it.
All right. And maybe we can hang out. Maybe we can get like real life
100%. Okay. Like if I find out, Pam, that you're in Charleston and you didn't hit me up, like I'm going to have to harass you about that.
Okay, good. What's your pet peeve?
I don't like being called by my legal name. My full name is Tanisha, and I'm so separated from that version of myself. It's my only pet peeve. It's like I'll correct people so quickly about calling me by my full name.
When did you start exclusively going by Nesha?
When I went through the self-development journey.
Okay. Does your family still call you Tanisha? Like your parents and grandparents?
They do. And it just like, it's like a thorn in my ear every single time. But I know because that's the version of who I am that they know, not this version of me. So yeah, I absolutely dread hearing my full name.
My family calls me Pammy, or some people that don't even know me call me Pammy if they are connected to like my older brother or my dad or my uncle. And it's really weird because like I used to be shy too. And when I hear Pammy, I see like 4-year-old too afraid to say anything.
Yes.
Pammy. Yep. But it's weird. Okay. What is your superpower?
I think I love this question. I saw it when you put it there. I think resilience. I always go back to this. Like if I think that there's one thing that I do that has helped me across the board, it's just that I bounce back, like I just look at life and I plan to fail. I plan to suffer. I plan to have some hard times, and I'm open to it.
Awesome. What is your worst quality?
I think I judge too quickly. Like I like to trust people really. Like I need to know what bucket of trust I can put you in. And so I observe and I witness and I watch, and I think I come to a conclusion about someone faster than I should sometimes. So yeah, I think I judge too quickly.
I'm sitting here like, wait, is that bad?
Well, I don't know. There's been a few times I've had to eat my words and say like, oh, I was completely wrong about this person, especially if it's not an energy thing. Like if your energy is off, I'm not going to trust you anyway. But if it's just 100% personality, I'm like, I like this about you. What does it say about you? And so, yeah, I think I'm a little harsh.
Fair. I think it's human. I think it's just humans, how our brains were wired to want to put people in a bucket. I noticed how judgmental I am and how judgmental my whole family is when I got married, because my husband's family is just, they're like beyond kind, and they never, if they judge, it's only in their head. And I'm like, my husband's like, you don't have to have an opinion on everything and you don't have to share it. I'm like, you don't?
Weird.
Yeah. So what is the fitness gear you cannot live without?
Oh, it has to be the watch. It has to be like some type of fit watch or smart watch. This is my Galaxy, but it just has to be something like that. I don't like running with my phone. I don't like running with anything really. I don't wear socks. I'm really simple, like sports bra.
Did you just say you don't wear socks?
I don't. And that's
run sockless.
Sockless, completely sockless. It's stupid with long runs because the toes and the blisters, it's very stupid to do. But it's just a natural thing that I've had since I was a sprinter. And sprinters, you don't wear socks in your spikes at all. And I just got used to it. So it's not comfortable for me at all. I just have to put on a lot of deodorant on my feet when I when I put on my long runs. So yeah, it has to be a watch because I'm pretty simple.
Do you think that makes you more resilient to like beat up your feet like that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, totally. It's part of your like master plan. What is what is your favorite workout?
I like, so there's a YouTube channel called, gosh, The Body Project. I've been following them for years, but definitely since the pandemic. And I love their workouts because they don't require you to jump a lot. And I'm getting a little bit older, so I'm protective of my knees. I can still run, but I want to be mindful of my knees. So they're very low impact, high, energy workouts, 20 minutes tops, so I'm all about that. And then I've recently fallen in love with yin yoga. Have you heard of that?
I think I've done it a couple times. It's like super like restorative.
Yes, very much like meditation and extended stretching. So not like your traditional yoga, like long 2 minutes stretching poses, and so that's been helping with like flexibility and things like that. Having all these kids and stuff, your back and your body just changes. So just try to be mindful, like the long-term goals for my body,
Yeah, for sure. That's great. What is the best advice you've ever received?
I would have to say it was from that first female commander that I had, my Chief Master Sergeant, Dee Dee Bailey. And she just told me, like, she used to always say the devil's in the details, right? And like, I didn't interpret that to me being a perfectionist, but it just was something I learned about paying attention to the little things all the time, especially as a leader, just paying attention to the little things to stand out. It's something I apply across the board. It's just pay attention, just be mindful of the little things. I don't sweat little things. She was always adamant about that, but just reminding us that the devil's in the details of everything we do.
I like that. And this is kind of turning a question back on you that you asked a while ago on LinkedIn, and it has stayed with me. You asked, what does success mean to you?
5 years ago, success would have been 100%. The goals that I met at this point, they were salary goals, they were financial goals, they were like social goals, they were all kinds of these type of external things for me back then. And then I hit them. I'm like, okay, I don't feel any different, right? Like I didn't change, nothing changed. I still feel like I'm in this grind. I still feel like I'm who I am. So what is it? And so I kind of got to a place now that success for me just means going back to being this bird that doesn't like to be caged. It's just that I have the power to create whatever reality I want, whatever that is for me. That makes me feel successful. As long as I have a say, if I have the right mind to voice my opinion, I feel successful. So if things are not going well in my marriage today and I wake up tomorrow, I'm like, okay, let's create a new plan. Let's talk about things differently. And then we work at a new plan, and now we're back on track for success. So I think it's just that. I know that doesn't necessarily answer it, but when I think about what makes me feel successful, it's just about feeling empowered. I feel successful when I feel empowered, when I feel like I have control, not of people, not of things that can be taken away. I have control over my mind, my emotions, like emotional management is something I think a lot of people struggle with. Like they go through these valleys in life and they just lose their crap, lose it and fall apart. And I've had tough times in my life, but I'm so grateful that I've never allowed myself to lose control of the fact that I have the power. Like it's a tough day today, but Jim Rohn always says, like, where there's day, there's night. Where there's, you know what I mean? Like you just have to believe that you have to have the hard times in order to have the beautiful days. You have to believe, and I do. I truly believe it. So, and that makes me feel successful because I feel like I still have control, even if there's a curveball thrown my way.
I love it. And it's not about not allowing yourself to feel the difficult emotions, right? It's letting yourself feel them, but also knowing like almost this too shall pass.
It will. And I wish more people again, talk about being a believer. It's that idea of, you don't have to believe in God, just believe that you have faith in yourself. Like I talk a lot about that in Courage Hackers. I talk about God a lot and I talk about faith, but the faith I really mean is faith in yourself. Is that create a life that you truly trust your ability to figure anything out. Create circumstances that you test your faith in yourself. You know what I mean? Like the more you prove yourself wrong about what you thought your potential or possibility was, the more successful you're going to feel, the more confident you're going to feel. You just have to keep putting yourself in these situations. Like, I'm afraid of deep water. I'm terrified of deep water, but I'm going to challenge myself to put myself in a circumstance where I'm just going to put myself out there and just prove myself that I didn't die. God, I hope I don't die, but like I didn't die. I didn't die. And I'm going to prove to myself that I can do it. We talk about the podcast, yeah, right? Like how many years did you go and I go of not putting ourselves into this podcast? Because either you don't think you have the time, you don't think you have the voice, you don't have the platform, no one's going to listen. And then you look at your statistics or you look at your consistency and you prove yourself wrong. You know what I mean? Like to me, that's success. Prove yourself wrong every chance you get about any doubt you have about who you are, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Let's end there because that's amazing. Oh, but let's not totally end. I want to leave everybody with, if you want more Nesha, where can we find you? And yeah, give us your socials and everything and all that.
Oh, yeah. For sure. So Courage Hackers Podcast. I realized I said that really fast. I live on LinkedIn. I have an Instagram at Nesha V Frazier, but I'm not necessarily as active there as I am on LinkedIn, and that's Nesha V Frazier too, but I'm always there.
Okay, Nesha V Frazier, and it's Frazier, correct?
Mm-hmm,
okay, and don't forget the V. When I originally emailed you, I forgot the V, and it was mayhem. So Nesha V Frazier.
the V does matter. It does.
All right. Well, you have been amazing. I feel like so energized just talking to you. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you for joining me for that conversation with Nesha V Frazier. I talked to her. I'll be honest, I don't know when I talked to her. It was so long ago. I am recording this outro in late April. After we stopped recording, Nesha asked me, so when are you going to launch? And I said, I don't know, hopefully April. I'm feeling pretty pleased with myself because my self-imposed deadline got pushed out by a month. I'm totally okay with that. If there's one thing I learned from my conversation with Nesha, it's to go for it before you're ready, to challenge yourself, to push yourself and find a way. Nesha is someone that just always finds a way. And I think if you take one thing from this episode, I would hope that it would be the importance of living in your purpose and creating the life that you want to create and not being a victim of your circumstances, and asking yourself, okay, what can I do under the circumstances? How can I make this better? How can I get to where I want to go next? I have to tell you, Nesha is actually one of the reasons I started my podcast when I did. I found her on LinkedIn and I tuned into her Courage Hackers podcast just from knowing her from LinkedIn. And it's just like a bite-sized dose of positivity every time I listen. Not only that, but more than once, Nesha's baby, she has 3 kids. Her little baby is probably a toddler by now, but this little baby would sometimes be on the recording. She would call the baby her mini co-host. And actually during our call, the baby came in a few times. I just edited that out. Not that her baby talking wasn't adorable. I just figured you probably wouldn't want to hear it. But what I loved about Nesha was I think that baby on her solo podcast makes it better because here she is just trying to get something out and trying to help her listeners without worrying if it's perfect. And I think that's a huge lesson for so many of us who hide behind perfectionism and we wait and we procrastinate and we say, oh, I'm not ready yet. Oh, I just need to do a little more research. I have to create the perfect recording environment, whatever it is, whether you're a podcaster or a writer or any kind of creative or an athlete. Whatever it may be, we have so many, let's face it, excuses for why we're not going to get going right now. And Nesha is somebody who is walking the walk. So I really hope you'll go find her. Check her out on TikTok. Check her out on Instagram. She's great. Her podcast is great. I could listen to her voice for hours. It's so soothing. It's so inspiring. As always, I am so grateful that you listened and that you stayed till the end. If you're still here, I'm assuming you liked what you heard. If you would do me a favor and don't do it for me, do it for other women who need to hear this good content. Please rate, review, and or subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. When you do that, it helps other people find it. That would mean a lot to me. If you were intrigued by anything we talked about, particularly around body image, come visit me at pam-more.com. You can learn more about my body positive coaching that I offer. I have a background as an occupational therapist. I'm a certified personal trainer. I've been writing about health and fitness and wellness, all that stuff for years. And I've gone through my own personal journey, which I'll talk about in bits and pieces on this podcast. But and if you just have a question, if there's a listener question, if there's a topic you want to hear more of, is there a guest you want to hear from, shoot me an email, pam@pam-more.com. And if you want to connect with me on social, the platform I am most active on is LinkedIn. So I know LinkedIn might seem stuffy and super professional. It's actually really fun. I find it really valuable. As I mentioned, I found Nesha and connected with her on LinkedIn. I've really made some genuine connections there. So go check out LinkedIn and let's connect over there if we're not already. Have a real fit day. Till next time.